Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is a little small review roundup. 6 small games that I'm just bundling together for a variety of reasons, partially because some of them are expansions or additions, some of them are just smaller box games, but let's go ahead and dive into these. Very quick overviews on all of these, won't heavily go into detail on them, but starting off with Gladius from Deepwater Games, from Cat Quartet Games. Gladius is a game of, arena combat. You're going to have a bunch of arenas set up that you're going to be going for certain traits on the gladiators, and then placing out gladiators, variable numbers of gladiators, to each of the 3 different arenas. Meanwhile, the players are going to take control of their unique asymmetric characters with their slight differences to their abilities, their decks, and then start playing cards down from one arena to the next. There's a balance of trying to place your bets. You're going to have certain bets as far as who's going to win, who's going to lose, who's going to come in last or whatnot. You never really want to be in the middle there. But then past that, you're trying to modify the arenas as you play down cards. I didn't love Gladius. It's okay. For me, it's a 3 out of 5. It's decent, it's fun, but it's also forgettable at the same time. Gladius just I don't find it to be intriguing enough as a concept. As a concept, you're basically trying to get your own gladiators to win while, distracting a bit of attention along the way. You're going to be playing cards face down, so when you do so, players are not certain. Did you modify that for good, for bad? Do you really know? How do you want to guess or predict based around what the players did? Which means it kind of devolves into this style of genre that we have a lot of, kind of working together on your goals with a degree of hiddenness to what your goals are. And the combination of those two just leave me not intrigued enough by the decision space around the game. It's fun, it's simple, it does the job, it's not a bad game, it just wasn't rewarding enough as I sat there and tried to think through, do I want to try to push the other players to ally with me? Do I want to talk out loud with them? Do I just want to try to guess that, Jan over there is going for this particular gladiator, and therefore if I double up with him, it'll work out in my favor? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think the decision space was interesting enough. You have your own abilities, you have your own stuff, there's definitely powers and abilities and card play going on, just not enough game around it to really pull me in. This decent, fun, 3 out of 5, not overly intrigued, but also not a bad time. From there, let's go to MicroMacro Crime City Full House. The only reason this isn't getting a full review is because I already did a full review of MicroMacro Crime City, and I haven't finished all the cases in this one yet, but it seems to basically be giving me the same game. Which is not a bad thing. I like MicroMacro Crime City. I played through the whole thing with my kids, and then, moved on from it. And now we have MicroMacro Crime City Full House, which is more cases in the MicroMacro universe. You'll have a different map, but a lot of the same systems at play. Again, I haven't played through all the cases yet, but I haven't seen anything new as far as what the game's doing. It just gives you more of the same. It's not really an expansion. It's a standalone game, and it works very well at what it's doing, but I would say that my entire review of MicroMacro could equally apply to this with not a single change in it. And so rather than do a full review where I say all the same things, I thought I'd cover in this video. Still a 4 to 5, hasn't changed, still enjoying it, hope to continue to see more content here, but I guess it's kind of like reviewing another unlock. Once you've reviewed one, there are relevant differences between one and another, but not necessarily significant enough to demand their own reviews. Although maybe, I guess you could, but I'm not going to. In this case, MicroMacro Crime City, Full House, really enjoyed it, just like its big brother, older brother, whatever it is. Next up, we have Cryptid Urban Legends. This one was a miss for me, although part of that is based on expectations. Part of it, although it's hard to say how much of what part. Cryptid Urban Legends is a 2-player version of Cryptid, which I think is the very first problem with the game, because I like Cryptid a lot. I really like Cryptid. In fact, it's one of the first reviews I ever did on this channel because of how compelled I was by the puzzle, the deduction puzzle it presented. Really solid game, really great. And when I heard about Cryptid Urban Legends, a 2-player version of Cryptid, I was so excited. And then I play this, and this has nothing to do with Cryptid. It uses the name Cryptid, but that's really the only comparison, the only overlap. That's literally it. Meaning, if you said, could you tell me anything else that this has similar to Cryptid? I don't think there is. It's not the same mechanic, it's not the same genre, it's not deduction, there's no mechanical overlay. You take a turn, that's probably the only similarity, and then it uses the name Cryptid. So offhand, it's coming in at a disadvantage because it took a game system that I was kind of expecting a 2-player version of, and it gave me a name. and a totally different game, which was already a letdown, and hopefully this already helps you with that, because I think walking with the expectation that this is not Cryptid will certainly help you be more intrigued by the game. As far as what the game is, it's 2 players, and it's basically, I mean, the thematic aspect of why it's connected to Cryptid is the idea of hunting monsters, although this couldn't be more abstracted as far as what that's doing. The general idea is you're going to have these blocks, you're playing out cards, and you're trying to move tokens back and forth as one player tries to hide the monster, the other player tries to catch the monster. So you have this mechanical, thematic decision space in the game, although that thematic decision space integrates itself not at all in the actual gameplay. The actual gameplay comes down to moving discs back and forth. You can have 3 colors of discs, and you have one player who's trying to constantly add discs to the board, and have them at the end of have his disc setups at the end of the city blocks, and the other player is trying to reduce it so that you never really have a presence on the board. It's really just about the presence of those discs as the players go back and forth playing cards from their hand to move these discs around, so that one player has them trying to never really have commonality. So there's never a spot that has the same number, there's never spots that have the same color setups, there's always differences that will help you deduct or deduce or find the monster. The other player trying to ensure that there are commonalities to stay alive, and specific commonalities at the end of the block, and then the blocks. The specific way the game plays ultimately comes down to taking actions back and forth, often tedious and slow, which is my second problem. My first problem is it's not Cryptid. My second problem is the actions felt tedious and slow and repetitive as the players slowly grind their way to either having a player hit the eventual win, or alternatively there's a kind of a tiebreaker mechanic of, oh, you got to the end of the game and, you know, you got more of these red discs along the way. So it's fine, but really didn't love it at all. Like, this is a 2.5 out of 5 for me. I did not enjoy my time with Cryptid Urban Legends. I found the gameplay to be abstract in nature, but abstract in a way that wasn't rewarding the way many other abstract games have been for me, and then of course the letdown of it not being Cryptid. So 2.5 out of 5, this is a miss for me, unfortunately. And then we have Bandida, a tiniest box on the table over here. Bandida is the follow-up to Bandido. I think it's Bandido. I think it's Bandido and Bandida, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to pull up in the rules and find out. But Bandido and Bandida, they're basically the same game for the most part, although I haven't played Bandido. I've only played Bandida. I'm just going by what I've seen from the games. But Bandida itself is basically an escape game. You're going to have a whole bunch of cards that you're laying out on the table as you try to create a network of tunnels. That's all it is. You can play it solo, you can play it cooperatively, you can just try to basically slowly spread this sprawl of cards across the table as you try to completely enclose it. There's a few gameplay variants, but that's the basic idea as far as how it goes. And so you're trying to just enclose Bandida and cut off her escape, or in one of the gameplay variants, help her escape, but there's not that much of an actual gameplay difference past one small rule. But the idea is just laying down cards and trying to build out a network. If you like tile-laying games, this has that tile-laying fun, except with cards specifically, but it's all about some cards have certain abilities, not necessarily that interesting abilities. They feel like a miss to me for the most part. They add a slight nuanced variant or differences or changing up the pace of the game, but none of them are particularly fun or brutal. They're just, you know, things that happen along the way. But the core gameplay itself of laying down tiles, there's a lot of variants to those cards that come into play, and a lot of decisions based around how you set up the tunnels. It's not necessarily the heaviest game. I mean, it's really not the heaviest game, neither in its size or in its gameplay, but I do find it strangely compelling. I do find this one a lot of fun. It's, first of all, it's travel size, so it gives you all that little fun little goodness, but I just find it fun. I've played this game solo, I've played this game with my kids, I haven't played with any of my game group, but I enjoy not necessarily the puzzle it provides, because I don't think the puzzle is that interesting. That once you go through a few games, the decision space as far as how you lay out your tunnels does get fairly locked in, and so this game is the kind of game that will stick around for a bit and eventually leave my collection, because I don't think the experience is varied enough. I don't think the game is varied enough. It's the same game every single time I play it, but it's fun. It's fun to work together with my kids and just slowly build out the network of tunnels and try to set things up in a way that we're well prepared for whatever cards come out next. It is fun, it is engaging, it's cheap, it's small, and all those things factor into my rating, which is a 3.5 out of 5. I am compelled by it, while giving you the cautionary tale aspect that I just don't think the decision space is that interesting once you get a few games in under your belt. As a travel game, as a fun little experience to dive into, easily recommend it. As a long time game that will likely stay in your collection forever, However, I doubt that will be the case. So 3.5 out of 5 for me, one that's sticking around for right now. Time will tell what happens to it as, well, time goes on. From there, we'll go to Project L Finesse. The Project L Finesse expansion, this is, as you might imagine, the expansion to Project L, the most recent expansion to Project L. I've already reviewed a long time ago with a whole different camera setup and table setup and all that. I reviewed the Project L game, as well as the expansion, the Ghost and the Ambassador expansion. And over here we have the Project L Finesse expansion, which is the newest expansion from the Kickstarter. Finesse basically adds adds two things to the game. The first is that it changes the game to have two endgame conditions, in addition to finishing a variety of cards. And I'm realizing I'm not really explaining this as if you know what Project L is, so let me take a step back. Project L is a polyomino tableau building experience as you try to build out your polyominoes to earn more polyominoes, to slot those polyominoes into a bunch of small little cards as you basically build out these fun little shapes. It's a half polyomino, half tableau building as you try to acquire more resources in the forms of more and better polyominoes. The Finesse expansion, what it primarily adds to the game, is it changes so that the game state ends in one of two ways instead of just one of one ways. The original Project L ended when you had a certain number of the blocks or the disc pads, whatever you want to call them, filled out and triggers endgame. Project L Finesse also adds a variation where it also ends at the end of 10 rounds, which, if you've watched any of my recent videos about things I don't like in games, you'll know that I don't like that in general. I like when the players determine the endgame as opposed to when the game gives you a set number of rounds, although to its credit, I think most, if not all, of my plays of Project L Finesse so far have actually ended in basically the same time frame anyway. Like, right when the game end would trigger, that's when someone pulls the last tile. So it basically ends up being roughly the same time. I still don't love the shift nonetheless. Meaning, even though they have them crossing the same game time, to me it's about knowing when the game ends as opposed to having a degree of unknown. And so I still don't love that change. And the second thing it's doing is along the way, it's giving you these goals to go for. So now every single round in Project L, you have some variation that will give you coins, and you can trade in coins for additional actions. So you have things like, oh, if you place these types of pieces into your puzzles these rounds, you'll get a bunch of coins, and then you can trade coins in for actions, so it's rewarding you for doing a certain type of thing. And since you can see these things coming, you can plan around that, which gives you a degree of tactical planning, not just for this turn, not just for right now, but for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 turns in the future, as you try to figure out, well, this particular goal or strategy of the game will help me on turns 5, 8, and 9. And if I throw in a dash of also getting these tiles, well, that will help me on turns 3, 6, and 7. And so you can start going through this degree of planning as you set yourself up for not just your own plans, but for what the game is rewarding you for as you go. I like that aspect of the game. I like that aspect of having an additional mindset to how I play, a little bit of a slight variety in terms of the strategy I pursue, so it gives you a little bit of a different puzzle. In addition to the fact that you always have different puzzles coming out, you also have a slight adjustment to how you normally typically would build up your tableau in Project L, and so I like how it gives you that different engine. I don't like the number of rounds things to the point that I'd probably house rule it to keep the same endgame condition of the original game and remove the number of rounds. It wouldn't really change the experience much at all, and again, as I said already, it kind of ends at the same time anyway, but this does give me the aspect of, but what if it doesn't? What if it goes on for another 2 rounds? It's ultimately going to come down to the players as to when it ends. So that's more of a house rule thing I'm likely going to go with going forward, but past that, I do like what the Finesse expansion adds. As far as my opinion of this and the original game, I don't think it changes it significantly. It adds a little bit of extra fiddliness to the rules, nothing crazy, but certainly a little bit of extra something else to the rules, while not necessarily improving the game for me. I like the expansion, but Project L was a 4, and I think this keeps Project L at a 4 for me. No major change there. I enjoyed it before, I enjoyed it after. I would say it's a good expansion to pick up if you really like Project L and you just want more variation to your Project L experience, but as far as a necessary expansion that you absolutely must have, I think it's a pass as far as that goes. I enjoy it, I like it, I recommend it, but if you don't have it, you're still going to enjoy Project L just fine. Lastly, we have Panorama. Panorama from Sparkworks Games. Panorama is a game of working together with your teammates, not really teammates, your opponents on your adjacent sides in order to build out the most beautiful panoramas. Basically, you're going to have cards, you're going to be drafting cards, and those cards go into a panorama to specifically fulfill certain in-game and bonus points. Every single card has their own ways they score. This card wants to be next to forest, this card wants to be next to this animals, these cards want to be just next to these other cards, that card's a moon card, it scores points on its own, but that you only have one of them in your display. They all give you different types of points as you build out your panoramas. But then additionally, you have these overarching goals that the whole table has access to. Who has the most wolves in their display? Who has the least wolves in their display? Who has maybe just one of every type of card and no unique, no overlap, only unique cards in their panorama? Now, as you play the game, whenever you place down a card, you can place it into the panorama on the left or the panorama on the right. And then all players are scoring for the panoramas on both sides. So when I play down a card next to Alex, I'm Alex, let's play a card next to, I don't know, Jack. When I'm playing down a card next to Jack on my left, as Jack and I build up this panorama, it's going to be worth 22 points at the end of the game. Meanwhile, I'm working with, let's go with Jill. I'm working with Jill on my right over here, and she and I are building on a panorama that's going to be worth 18 points. So the 22 points here, the 18 points here, my total score is 40. But meanwhile, Jack's going to score 22 points plus something else, and Jill's going to score 18 points plus something else. So you're building up panoramas, but you're each scoring for your own panorama. Now, I have two basic issues with Panorama before we get to the fact that I think the game's a good game. I just don't think it necessarily shines or really stands out for me. But Panorama is a fun experience with two caveats, I guess. The first caveat is the fact that I didn't find the game necessarily variable enough in the interesting decisions you're making to continue to dive into this after a few games. It's the kind of game that I think is fun for a few games. I just don't think it changes much after that. The core variation of how the cards score and how you place those cards is not a ton of decisions based around it. Sure, you want to place this wolf next to that, and you want to place this tree next to that, and you do have to line up the mountains, which gives you a little bit of an interesting challenge, although the problem with that is it's not necessarily an extra interesting challenge so much as a restriction. So a game that already doesn't have that much decision space around what the ideal way to play your cards in is further, it gives you an extra degree of potential restriction to that decision space by limiting the way you can place your cards, which I think the limitations in general are great because they can force you into having to make difficult decisions, but only if the decision space allows you to actually do so. In this game, I find in Panorama, because the decision space is already limited, I find that the further limitation of it just reduces you to even fewer options and not that many interesting decisions to be made. You'll play down your cards, you'll play them down to the ideal panorama, and it'll mostly work out the way you'd expect it. The player, if somebody else took your seat and was playing the game for you, their decision space wouldn't veer significantly from yours, especially as the game progresses. Maybe initially in the beginning of the game, sure, but especially as the game progresses, you're kind of locked into more and more obvious choice as the drafting of cards continue, as the how you're going for the overarching goals makes more sense for what you're building. So yeah, it's good, it's fun, but not necessarily amazing in that sense. The second complaint I have is the fact that this game doesn't reward you for basically having a single person completely unlucky based on how their partners are playing cards. In fact, the very first time I played this game, I was like, that could be a problem. And sure enough, in that game, it was a problem. It's a problem in the sense that what happens is, I'm going to compare this to between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig for a second, but if you ever played between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which has a similar sharing mechanism between players, in that game, the game works around that by basically having it so you score for your lowest castle. So it's always in your best interest to ensure that you have them both balanced, because a 22-point castle here and an 18-point castle here is only 18 points, not 40, and that means you want to keep them balanced. If this panorama over here is not doing so well, you want to give it a little bit more love, a little bit more attention, and make it do better. But that doesn't happen here. And so you can, and in one game I did have happen, a game where a single player just got the worst scores from the group because their two players working with them just didn't really help them out as much. And so that choice around how you score for the sum of your partners as opposed to the lowest of your partners means that you could have one person just drawing the short end of the stick. Now, I don't think that's that much of a critique because it doesn't necessarily happen that much. It depends on how often you play, and the game does seem to mostly work out despite that, but it certainly can it certainly can and has happened for me. Overall, Panorama is a 3 out of 5 for me. I think it's a fun experience. It's one that I'm happy to have played, but it's one that I don't feel compelled to dive back into. It's fun without being standout, if that makes sense. I mean, that's what a 3 out of 5 is for me, so that's where we are with that. And that is 6 games reviewed. Some that I particularly like, but just didn't really necessarily get their own video, and others I didn't necessarily feel the need to heavily dive into in their own videos. Some good, some okay, some that I'd rather not particularly play again, and that is basically that. Until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, have a good one.